Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lurking for Legends, a live video cast where we talk to people from all walks of the publishing industry. I'm Richard H. Stevens, author of the epic fantasy Soulforge universe. Filling in for Christy Stratos is my amazing co-host David M. Kelly, author of the science fiction series Joe Ballon, science fiction series Logan's World, and several other standalone books, including the anthology Dead Reckoning and other stories. Lurking for Legends is a live interactive broadcast, and we encourage viewers to chime in with questions for our guests or comment on what you hear on the show. And tonight we're excited to have with us fantasy author Marie. Welcome, Marie. We're glad to have you on Lurking for Legends tonight.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And before we get started, for those who may not know you, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, as you said, I'm a fantasy author. I'm very grateful to live and work on Treaty 4 territory in Regina, Saskatchewan. My new series is medieval fantasy. It's called Last of the Gifted, Spirit Sight and Water Sight. And it's about a warrior in training and his sister in 13th century Wales. Both of them have a magical gift, but they are facing the ruthless army of Edward I, Longshanks, right? And they get a little help from the last true Prince of Wales after his murder. So this is the series that I wrote just recently, and it's come out just in the last year. And it's really, I would say, my heart project, Richard. I love this is, material that I've been working on for a long time, and it relates a little bit to my own family history. So because my background is Welsh, and I'm also the author of 40 children's books, which have been published by traditional publishers like Scholastic Education and Amicus and Learner and others. And I also have short stories and poetry and literary magazines and nonfiction articles in print and online. And I'm very happy to be here and talk about all of it tonight.
So that's awesome. You list your books as historical fantasy. And that being said, what exactly are they about? And what, I know you mentioned a couple of names there, but what time period would that be in?
So 13th century, and it's in Wales. So the series is, you could say historical fantasy, but maybe it would be better to say medieval fantasy, because historical sometimes means, 17th, 18th, 19th century, whereas this is back to the 13th. And I have based it in a time period when basically Wales lost its independence, lost its use of language, lost their ability to be an independent country with its own culture and language and laws and so on, and were taken over by the English. And so this was an invasion to end the Welsh. When Edward was finished with this invasion in 1283, late 1283, he actually sent out a proclamation that said, "We have exterminated the Welsh." But when
he didn't do very well, did he?
Didn't do very well. Yeah, you could say that, because when we were there, I went there for the first time. My grandfather is from Wales, but he was basically dead by the time I was born. And I was a little bit obsessed maybe with that whole aspect of my cultural heritage. So I went over there, but not until I was in my 50s. And I gathered up my kids and we went over there together. And that's when I found out some of this history. And I just got really fascinated by it and wanted to set something. I guess the story kind of took me over in a way, and so I decided that this was the time period I would write about. I don't think I would have written a historical novel if it hadn't been this one. You know what I mean? Like, I think this was my entrance into kind of thinking about history as something to write about. And I had been writing quite a bit by then, so mostly short stories though, and things like that. So this was really my first novel. And it took me, I won't tell you how long, it took me a long time to write it. I actually went back, and it was my thesis project. I went back and got my MFA in creative writing at the University of British Columbia in order to write this novel. So it was something I really wanted to use the time period, but I'm a fantasy writer. So for me, there had to be a way to also use magic. And so I had to actually find out a little bit more about Welsh magic, which there's a lot about Irish magic and Scottish magic, and you get the Fae and so on. The traditions that we think we know are mostly from that side of the Celtic, field. So it was interesting to kind of figure out what it would have been like, what people would have known back then, And that's what basically took me the amount of time that it took to write these novels. But it was something I really felt passionate about. I guess I really wanted to do it as well as I could.
It's interesting. I actually, I'm originally from England, and I actually used to go to Wales on vacation when I was a child with my family. So it's kind of interesting, and you're right, a lot of the kind of Welsh history and mythology has been quite largely lost. You know, you hear a lot of the other Celtic traditions. So what was it specifically about the sort of Welsh heritage that attracted you and made you think, yeah, I really want to like bring this in?
Yeah, we were, well, first of all, we went over, like I had my thinking that I had done all this research, right? And basically when we got there, I had rented 13, like a couple of places, you know, for us to stay during the time period that we were there. But one of the places that we were staying in was a sheep farm, like a working sheep farm with a little cottage, you know, and whatnot. And down in the front of the cottage, there was this sort of stone thing, you know, like we were wandering around looking at it. And I asked the farmer, like, what is this, you know, all about? It looks kind of like a house, or it looks like it might have been the foundation of a house or something. And he said, oh yeah, that's, you know, circa 1100. Right, that was the one, and it might, in my head, I since then I have thought it might have been one of the lost llys, the royal courts that actually were destroyed deliberately by Edward I at this time period. But around that we were near Dolwith Castle, and so, you know, just one day we got in the car and drove over there, and we'd been to some of the big English castles by then, right? And so I had my tickets, you know, like I bought the Cadw tickets and all that, you know, that I spent massive amounts of money to get me and my kids into these things. And we had a sense that we knew what we were doing. You get a guided tour and you do this and do that. And we drove up and the whole place was completely deserted, right? There was like nobody in the parking lot. We drove in, there was like these signs, you know, that were like, kind of like people falling off of mountains. It was kind of like enter at your own risk, right? Or whatever, right? But it was, Dolwith is incredible. It's like this really austere, tall thing at the top of this hill, you know, mountain, essentially, really, but you're up pretty high by then anyway. So we walked up and past this lovely waterfall and, you know, this grounds and all that, going up to this kind of imposing stone thing. But it's actually quite a bit smaller than the English ones. And we got up to it and we were looking up, and on the door to Dolwith is not on the ground floor where you would expect the door to be, right? It's up about halfway up the tower, and you have to climb. There's these steps up to it, stone steps. I guess at the time in the 13th century, they would have come up by ladder, you know, no steps allowed, right? It was a defensive mechanism of the Welsh, which I knew nothing about. It was just really kind of like, wow, what is that? You know, like, how would they get in there? You know, and so on. Anyway, we went in and there were placards around. Nobody to take your ticket, nobody to give you a guided tour, nothing, like no idea what this was in the middle of nowhere, right? But there were placards placed all the way around the main floor of it. And you could see things like, it was kind of like if you thought of it, apparently the men would sleep on one side of the big room and the women would sleep on the other side. Honestly, David, I don't know how long that would last, but we'll say that happened, right? Men on one side, women on the other, for at least a little while. And there was a hearth, and, you know, you could see all these different pieces where people would live together in this place. And it was quite different than what I thought of as a castle and what I had seen up to that point in castles, in the English castles. So you got a sense that something different was going on, right? And then the placard started talking about 1280, this invasion, 1282, 1283, when they lost this and they lost that. And whereas we were looking at it, by 1283, there were, you know, the English had brought in walled cities and so on. And if you were Welsh, you were not allowed to stay after 5 o'clock. You were not allowed to do business in your own language. You were not allowed to do this. You were not allowed to do that. You had to come into town at certain times. And, you know, so if you were a rural person in a farming area, that'd be quite a shock, right? To have to go to a town and kind of like register yourself or be there at certain times and so on. So we started thinking about that. And of course, I'm from Regina, and the traditions that we were learning about here for the First Nations, the treatment of the First Nations people here was very much the same thing. They were not allowed in the town overnight, in Regina overnight. They had to stay on what are now the exhibition grounds out on the outskirts of town. couldn't speak their own language, very similar, hey, very similar to what I was reading about the Welsh. And I just thought to myself, wow, that's quite the thing to happen. And look how long ago that was. And it was still being done in like the 1900s, and the more I thought about it, the more I just had to find out more about it. We walked up onto the wall walk and we were looking around at this lovely landscape, right? It's just gorgeous in that area. And thinking about that being filled with somewhere, in it's rough estimate, between 3,000 and 10,000 of Edward's troops would have been there besieging this castle until it was opened somehow. They got in and there wasn't a lot of fight, apparently. So I started thinking about that and how that one might have happened and why it might have happened and what it would have felt like to be facing all those troops. That was the first time that anyone had ever used, or that Edward had really used camouflage. Apparently his wife and her ladies made the whole army a bunch of nice white coats so they'd blend in with the snow, things like that. It was just like, wow, all this stuff I had no idea had happened. And this was part of the history that it's my history, right? It's my family history. So it was kind of, I don't know, I just got attracted to all of that and started to read more about it. And it took a lot of work to research it because it's a time period when a lot of the records were actually destroyed. Edward the First was notorious for keeping really meticulous records, but for whatever reason, not about this invasion, right? And there is good records, or good, we know for sure that Edward took records out of the Welsh monasteries, Welsh records, and literally burned them and literally destroyed records from that time period. And really, it was his intention to completely annihilate the House of Ebefra, the whole family, all of them. And he did. He pretty much put an end to that entire family by the beginning of the 1300s, when the last of them died in the beginning part of the 1300s. That was it for that entire dynasty, was gone, right? So it felt really deliberate, and it felt really like I had to find out more about why and what had happened as much as I could. So it's been an interesting time too, because a lot of this research is just being done now since the Welsh have gained their use of their own language back. And of course, when we were there, the children at the farm were actually being taught in Welsh, just like in Quebec, right, where the language of the day or the language of the country is now Welsh. Welsh first on the signs, Welsh in the schools. If you want to work in Wales, you need to speak Welsh. And so I went a few years later, I went back to Nant Gwrthyrn and I took a Welsh class because, my grandfather was a Welsh speaker. So I felt like I should do that. And also it kind of fit in with the research. I just wanted to kind of know more about that. So I did a lot of stuff that I didn't probably need to do, in order to kind of dig all of this up and feel it more than just read about it or write about it,
So we have a question from Hillary. She's saying, so interesting to hear about your research. Have you included some of the Welsh language in your books?
Yeah, I did. And I had to really fight for it. I actually have a glossary. I had to put a pronunciation guide in the front so that people would know how to say people's names, because I used deliberate Welsh spellings of names and places, partly because too, that's what's happened. Like a lot of the names in 1282, 1283, the names were anglicized. And that was, I never heard of that happening before that. So I think maybe that was part of something that's been done since. If you change the names of something, that's a really good way to colonize it, right? Like take the names and make them new, so make them your own and take away from the original language. And that was done to a lot of the place names. So I found out, and I tried to use like the proper names for waterfall and the proper names for the places that were there in the 1200s, and the spellings of the names as Welsh as I could get them. I had my teacher at Nant actually read the original, one of the early drafts of one of the manuscript, and went over the Welsh for me. And I wanted to have they were very creative people, so I wanted them to write in Welsh as well, like to have some songs and things like that they would say. And I wanted to write them. I didn't want to write them. I wanted to use the originals, but I didn't think I could. So I wrote new ones, and I wanted them to be in the book in Welsh. So I did. It took a fair bit of work because I'm not a Welsh speaker. And even after the Welsh class that I took, my teacher said at the end of the class, she said, well, now you're all graduated, you're kindergarten Welsh speakers, right? I was like, okay, thanks. But it's not an easy language to learn. But I did my best. I hope that the Welsh speakers who read this book will appreciate that I've done it correctly. At least I hope I've done it correctly, and they appreciate the effort. At least I tried. But yeah, I felt it was
a very difficult language. Yeah.
It is, but I felt it was really important because that's what was lost. One of the things that was lost was the language, right? The ability to use that language. And weirdly enough, too, I had read that when it came back in the 1990s, when the Welsh got the right to use their own language again, they were speaking it and writing it the way it was done in the 1200s. And the family lore that my grandfather had apparently told my father, who told me, is that people kept the language alive in the mountains, kind of like in secret, and the Wales is not a big tourist area. Like you think of going to Ireland, you think of going to Scotland, but you kind of don't think about Wales, and it's almost deliberate. Like they were hiding literally, and keeping their culture alive, kind of very much under the table, underneath everything that was going on around them. And they had to, right? Because you could be beheaded, you could have your tongue cut out if you were caught speaking Welsh, right? So pretty drastic, but they managed to keep it alive for like 800 years and then bring it back in the 1990s the way it had been spoken into the 1200s, which is pretty cool. So it was I felt it was really important to use the language in the books. Absolutely.
So they weren't allowed to bring that back till the 1990s?
Well, I think my grandfather was happy enough in Canada to say that he was a Welsh first speaker, but yeah, in the schools they wouldn't have been allowed to speak Welsh. Wow. Like they would have been speaking English. They would have been taught in English, and I suspect they would have been punished. And in fact, there's a lot of, like, if you read, and everything I had read up to that point, which was English literature, they were always very down on the Welsh. Like the Welsh have this sing song. Don't speak like that. Speak English properly, not in all that sing songness. And it's the way that the Welsh speak is, it's kind of almost a romance language in some ways. It doesn't go together like English does. It has a different kind of cadence to it, and that's why my grandfather obviously had a very, very thick accent. Because there are things that, like the census taker in 1916, who was obviously writing notes based on what my dad was telling him, kept spelling things weirdly. Even people's names he spelled all weirdly. And I thought to myself, well, that's because that's how he said it, right? That's how my grandfather would have said it. And it doesn't sound like English. So he wrote it, the census taker wrote it phonetically, and it comes out as this weird word. It's like, who was that? And things. So yeah, I think it, yeah, it's a language that I think they would have had to hide pretty carefully. My grandfather's not alive to ask, but that's the impression that I got. Yeah, that they were very much speaking it to each other and not to the rest of the world. So yeah.
So on your website, it mentions that you not only write books, but you also edit as well.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about that? Do you actually edit your own books, or do you get help for your own books?
No. Yeah, like you think you can, right? But weirdly enough, you can't I can't edit my own books. I am not I can be a pretty decent proofreader, but not of my own work. There's all kinds of things that people catch, so what I did was for my books, I actually had 3 different editors. So I was able to get some grant money, which I really appreciate, from Creative Saskatchewan, to hire a couple of editors. And I hired a developmental editor who was basically an expert in historical fiction to look at the books and make sure that they had a through line that made sense, and that they were working properly. And then I had a historical editor, Danielle Cebulski from Ottawa, or from Ontario. I think it's Ottawa. She's a Canadian, but she's an expert in Welsh and medieval history. And she's the 5-minute medievalist. She's got her podcast. If you're ever looking for something fun and interesting about the Middle Ages or medieval times, I guess, I would highly recommend Danielle, because she's also very good at editing for novelists. So it's not, I was really really worried about that. Like I thought, if I get somebody from, the history department of some university telling me how to write my book, they're going to be telling me I have to do this and I have to do that. Bear in mind, I'm a fantasy writer. So like, yes, I want to set it in reality. I want it to be correct for the time period, but I also want to do certain things that would obviously not have happened, right? That would be fantasy oriented. And but Danielle was perfect, because she would do things like, she would say, well, at this time period, they probably wouldn't have said this, but they might have said it this way, so you could try this, or you could try that, or maybe it would be, so she would kind of make offers about other options that I could try, which was great. And then I had also my editor at Wood Dragon Books, Jeannie Martinson, who basically copy edited and edited about 5 or 6 times through it with me. So yeah, I think editing is really important, but I also think for your own work, it's really hard, because you fill in too much with your mind,
For sure. Yeah.
that isn't there on the page, right?
Absolutely.
You definitely mind map your sentences, and you read them the way you think they should be
You
written.
read them, you see them the way you think they are.
You don't see the mistakes. Yeah, no, for sure. I'm guilty of that myself. I know you said you went back to school and you got your degree in creative writing, and other than the obvious benefits of doing that, how has that helped your career? Because I know you told me you've been a reporter before, and so you're well versed with the English language and structuring sentences and everything else. How did the creative writing degree help you as a writer, other than the obvious, learn the tropes and stuff?
It was a real challenge to me. Like, I'm glad I was as far ahead as I was when I went there, because most of the people that I took classes with were actually already published writers, and some of them were writers in residence. With the writer in one of my fiction classes, with the writer in residence from Ottawa Public Library was with us, and as a student in our class, and so on. So I mean, getting feedback and critiques from students like that, and also UBC, you do 3. You don't do one genre, you do 3. You have to do 3 to get in, and you have to do 3 to graduate, right? So, and so I did short stories. I did children's. We had a children's and young adult fiction together, and short stories, and also nonfiction. I did a class in writing for television, which was way fun and very good for plot, just in terms of plot and structure. But yeah. And I did also a poetry class with Karen Soley. So we had some really magnificent teachers with some really good students, like who were giving you critiques, and we had to write. I will say this, you won't believe it, but we actually wrote 600-word essays a week, 3 in craft and 3 critiques. And the rest, and more than that, like, because you were expected to write more than that. That's what you were required to write every week, right? One of those you could write in advance. The other 2 you had to write during the week on the basis of the discussions that went on. So we had discussion forums where people were constantly writing, basically for 3 days. Basically 48 full hours in a row where you just didn't sleep. You just read and wrote, and So it was really good. It pushed me a lot. I think I got a lot better. Actually, everything that I wrote there has been published or has won an award since then. So really pleased with UBC MFA. It was really good. I would highly recommend it if anybody's interested in, pushing themselves to a higher degree. And that's what I really felt I had to do to write these books. I knew they were big, and I wanted to do a lot. It's a very ambitious project. So I wanted to get the best help I could, I guess. And, I have 5 university degrees, so it seemed natural to me to go back and get the MFA at that point, which would be, I guess, my 4th degree, that one.
That's awesome. So I know we're never supposed to ask a woman their age and stuff like that, but how old were you went back to get this?
When I went back, I was in my 50s. Let me think. Well, I'd have to do math to figure that out, but I was definitely in my 50s when I went back to get my MFA. Yeah. And it was a challenge, but like I say, it's so worth doing,
right,
just for for the challenge of it, I guess you could say, really.
And it's amazing how much it sounds like you've learned, and you come from a writing background as far as being a reporter and everything else, and you still learn that much again going forward.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
All of these things are so important, like I really think I learned from all of them. But yeah, the MFA, I would highly recommend doing it. I know there's a lot of controversy about it. People say, somebody's going to tell you how to write and blah, blah, blah. And that's not what it was like at all. It was more like you really had to make sure that your voice was there to be heard. You know what I mean? Like if it wasn't there, people would tell you. And it was sometimes not that kind, right? but at the same time, we were all in it together too, so there was a kind of a, I don't think it was offensive either, like it was good, strong critique though. It was like, what do you really mean here? What are you really trying to say with this or with that? And our instructors were like that as well. It was not an easy class at all. None of them were, but they were, well, like I said, everything that I did there has been published since. So it was obviously worthwhile, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And in terms of editing that you do yourself, do you specialize in any particular genres, or is it kind of across the board?
I try and stick to fiction. I do write a lot of nonfiction, but I haven't done a long form nonfiction book, like a memoir or anything like that, because it's really not what I read, I read a lot of fantasy and I read a lot of contemporary fiction, young adult fiction. So I would go for young adult, definitely, and fantasy of any kind, fantasy for any age group or audience or whatever. And contemporary fiction, I think I stick to young adults. I'm not that into some contemporary fiction. I'm not that into historical, weirdly enough, because but if it was in the 1300s, if it was in the 1200s or 1300s, I might tackle it now because I have a lot of background in that now. But beyond that, I wouldn't probably a historical. I think they have to be carefully done. And I think it's really a good idea to get experts to work with. I did that. And I think I would recommend that to someone. If they came to me with a historical, I would say, you know what, here's what I would say. And I'm a member of a lot of writers' organizations, so I can probably put somebody on to somebody who could help them better than me,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you've also published more than 40 children's books. That's amazing. So
Yeah.
What are children's books about? Is it a series? Is it
yeah.
Or what are they?
I have five series of beginner readers, picture book beginner readers, that were just the greatest thing ever. I really enjoyed writing them. That was for Amicus, and I had a very good editor working with me. What happened was I had done the thing where you send, a company that does nonfiction books for kids, your introduction, like this is who I am and blah, blah, blah. And I've got this MFA and I can do all kinds of things. And then nothing. I didn't hear anything back for a full year. And then one day in my inbox, it popped up this message saying, hi, we're from this company and we have this series that we're working on, and it's going to be 6 books, and would you like to write one? And of course, being me, I wrote back and said, yeah, I'd like to write all of them. Give me all 6, So they did, right? And yeah, that was the beginning of a marvelous relationship, I guess you could say, because I did write with that same editor 4 more series of 6 for her. So there was a lot of them right there. And then I wrote some nonfiction for middle grades and a couple of science books for grade 2s, things like that. So they're mostly nonfiction. There's some fiction mixed in because a lot of the beginner reader series are actually fiction. But yeah, the first series we did was, the reason that I wanted to do it is it was based on photographs, right? It's going to be about real animals, not anthropomorphic animals. So I wanted to, I thought, well, that's right up my alley. I'll go research all this stuff about interesting animals. It'll be great. And it was fun. But you had to, okay, so these are books that have 100 to 125 words. So you've got to tell the entire story of this animal in 16 pages in that many words and make it make sense and make it funny.
Wow.
And you're a fantasy writer.
Well, yeah,
Fantasy writers can't say hello in under 5,000 words. Yeah.
Yes, I know. It's like the opposite, right? So my fantasy is kind of like I have to push myself to write more. Like what am I not saying that you need to know? Because to me, it's like I'm a journalist and I started out writing books as writing these kids' books, right? So these very, very spare, like say it all in 100 words and yet say a lot. Like I did a lot of research for those books, weirdly enough. But you had to keep honing it down. And you had to use certain words. So it was like a puzzle, pulling the puzzle pieces into me, just this nice little thing, right? And then to go from that, like that's why one of the reasons why I guess I thought I should go back and get my MFA, because it was not novel, was not a novel. So I just felt like this huge rambly thing. Like, how am I going to do that, right? When I write nice, tight, tense short stories and nice, tight, tense journalistic pieces, yeah. Yeah, it was a challenge, but it was a good one. And I'm going to write 3 more at least, because I have already started them based on this same time period and this same scenario and the same characters going through the loss of everything, because I want to know how that ends, I guess, and I have to write it to find out.
So,
sorry, Dave. Is that the series that The Last of the Gifted?
Yeah. So The Last of the Gifted, technically it's a duology. It's kind of those 2 characters. I feel like I did that, like that the arc is there. But I want to carry the same group of so this is kind of a British piece. It's got an ensemble, right? A lot of characters that work together to make something happen. And I want to take those characters into the year after, because I feel like it's important to know how that all turned out. Like, okay, so you lost everything. Now, how do you get over it? Because that's what really interested me about Wales, was not so much just the loss of all those things, but the fact that when I was looking at Wales, it had already been using, Welsh was back. It was on all the signs, actually we saw some signs that might've been painted over, almost in Welsh, right? So they might've been like British highway signs, English highway signs, but painted over with the white Welsh words. You could almost see the word that was there before, and the word that was on the map was not the word that was on the sign, because they had changed it back to the Welsh name of that whatever county, city, whatever. So I don't know, looking at that kind of thing, another reason why I really wanted to kind of dig into this and do it the right way. Yeah.
You're muted, Dave. You flicked the other way.
Sorry. Flicked it the wrong way. So you've written 40 children's books. You worked as a journalist. You've written these novels and so on. It's like, so what do you do in your copious amounts of spare time?
Well, I teach ESL too. I have a couple of classes of ESL. In fact, in this last week, I have graded 163 assignments. Some of them were quite short, but nevertheless, wow. I wrote 18 progress reports, had 21 student meetings, and also wrote two journalistic articles in the last week and a half.
Wow.
So it's been, it's just like, I like to write.
Saskatchewan have 30-hour days?
Yeah, I have a cat. I have a garden. I love medieval. I've started to do medieval cooking, which is really cool. There's a class actually that I would highly recommend. It's called Eat Medieval, which is an online cooking class out of Blackfriars Abbey, the Blackfriars Abbey restaurant, and the University of Durham. It's so cool. It's like everything that you thought about medieval food is wrong. I could tell you that right now. It's very spicy. It's weird. It's very different, but it's also quite spicy, actually. And if you're on a low sodium, low sugar diet, I would highly recommend it, because it uses a lot of cinnamon and ginger and cloves and things like that, as opposed to a lot of salt, as we do today, but it's also fusion. It's a class in fusion cooking. So medieval cooking, but for the modern palate, you could say. It's very fun. Yeah, I do all kinds of things, actually.
Wow.
But I mean, it's, we have a lot of time on our hands now with COVID, right? So I can't drive, can't travel right now. So yeah,
So all that writing you do, did you take part in NaNoWriMo on?
Oh, always. Yeah, I always do.
Oh, yeah.
I did not win this year. I got interrupted by too many other things that I was doing. So I didn't win Nano this year, but I did the last 2 years. And I think I didn't the year before that and did the year before that. So sometimes I win, sometimes I don't, with the
That's the first
50,000.
year I did it.
Is it?
Yeah.
And how,
Yeah,
did you get
I did
50,000?
win. No, I didn't win.
That's okay. Don't worry. You'll just do it. You will eventually, right? If it's just
It's amazing
it's
what
a challenge.
all of a sudden things just start happening and you don't actually get there. And
Yeah.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around what you're talking about with the Welsh signs and everything else. I'm thinking that must just play hell on GPSs.
Yeah,
So
I'm sure it does.
Your GPS on your dashboard, and all of a sudden you're looking for a specific name, and it's got a Welsh name on there instead. And
I know.
you know,
Well,
if
it's
you're
not so
Welsh,
bad.
you have no idea.
It's not so bad now, because it's been long enough that Google has changed things. Yeah, but back
Right.
in 2000, in the mid to like 2006, 2007, 2008, it was. I wouldn't have tried to use. I don't think there was GPS back then. I wouldn't have tried to use it because literally the maps we were looking at, it was like, where are we? None of these names are right.
Yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
that'd be fun.
So yeah, but it was interesting.
Yeah. So you were telling me before we went on that you were planning to go back to the British Isles to do some more research.
Yeah, I wanted to go. Also, there's maybe going to be one of the reasons I want to go too is that there might be a medieval cooking class in person. And
wow.
I would like to go for that as well. But yeah, basically there's a couple of abbeys that I'd like to look at in more detail because I want to use them as settings. And I don't know, you don't need to do that. Like I could probably do it with Google Satellite or something, right? You know what I mean? But I find, again, it's about the feeling of it. I just would rather, yeah. And I realize it's not the 1200s anymore. So, and a lot has changed and the climate is different and the landscape is a little different and so on. But I just feel like if I can walk around in the area, I'm a little bit like that. Like, once I've been, like, I find it, I get lost a lot. Once I've been somewhere, I can get there again and get back again. But getting there is sometimes an intriguing event in itself because I don't know, I just get distracted with different things and end up going the wrong way and so on. Actually, my first trip to England, I drove 60 kilometers south of the London Heathrow Airport instead of north. Not quite sure how I got off of that. It's the round things, the circles. It's like, God. Anyway, we ended up going south, and I didn't know that. We were driving along the highway, and I'm thinking, something's wrong. We're not passing the right places at all, and this is still England, right? So they obviously weren't renamed or anything. And I saw this big building, and it was kind of like Canadian Tire, had that kind of look, like the same, colors and whatnot. And I thought, well, if that's a Canadian Tire, if they can tell me where I am and where I'm going, right? Because that's where I would go in Canada if I was lost, right? So I drove in, and we went up to the counter and said, I just came out of the Heathrow Airport. It's been about an hour, and I think I'm in the wrong place. Can you tell me where am I? And like, how can I get to Ironbridge? And he looks at me and goes, "What?" It's like, you're 60 kilometers in the wrong direction. You know what I mean? Gets out the map and tries to show me how to get there. So it was like, yeah, that's it's always intriguing, to go on a trip and find something that you're looking for me. Because I always end up doing weird things, but interesting things happen, right? And that's all part of it, which is why I'd rather go myself and walk around in the area, because I never know what I'm going to see until I see it, like the Dolwith Castle. Sure. Like I believe in those experiences. That's synchronicity or something. You put yourself on a path and you find what you're looking for because you're on the path. You know what I mean? It's going to come, right?
It infuses something inside you when you actually visit the place, as opposed to see it on a computer screen, for sure. It's just,
yeah, I really think it does. And the sounds, like, I've gone through where I've recorded bird sounds, or just recorded the sound of going on a walk in a different place, because it's got a different sound than here. I walk here and I know what my area sounds like. So it's kind of fun to come back and play those recordings just while you're working, and you're thinking, yeah, that's different, like it's nothing really, but it's something, it's just a little bit of atmosphere, and sometimes that gives you something, some flavor, some color that you wouldn't have had otherwise. I learned that being a journalist. That's one of the things that I found out right away. You can do a lot of journalism on the phone, And I was doing that. I worked up north in a weekly newspaper in Meadow Lake, which is on near a flying dust reserve. And I was covering a story, and I mean, as a journalist, you're taught to phone everybody, do these phone interviews. I'm pretty good at it, So I'm talking to this guy on the phone, and he says, "Yeah, why don't you just come out here and see for yourself, right?" And I did, and it was a completely different story than it would have been if I hadn't. And I think that's where I just learned that, for me, it makes a big difference if I'm there and walking on my own feet and walking around in that area and just letting that atmosphere sink in makes a very different story for me than if I don't, if I only rely on the other kinds of research that you can do. Have to do it all, have to do all of that research for me to get it the way I want it. Yeah.
So in terms of marketing your books and everything, is that something that you're involved in yourself, or is that something that your publishers take care of, or is it both?
Yeah, you mean all of that? You sure hope your publishers do some of it for you, and the good ones do, right? But yeah, you have to. I think you have to do a lot of that yourself today. I don't think, unless you're like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, and I bet they do their own too. Just different at a different level than me, right? But yeah, I think that you have to expect to do a lot of your own marketing as a writer. I have a publicist, you know what I mean? And I have all kinds of tools. Like I'm in different organizations. Like I said, I'm in a lot of different writers' organizations, and all of that is networking, and also images. Because if I'm going to use social media, I want to make sure I have images to show. Because I was also a reporter photographer, so to me, every story has an image, some kind of illustrative image that goes with it that I could think of, that would just give another aspect to the story. And in teaching too, you want to make sure that you hit people in different ways, right? So you've got your oral learners, and you've got your visual learners, and you've got your kinesthetic learners, and getting all of that in there. So that you do the same thing, I think, with marketing. You want to make sure that you have everything that you can. That you can get the books everywhere that they need to be to find someone who wants to read them. I think it's really important, actually.
For sure. So, just before we say goodbye, what's next with Marie Powell? What's coming? What's your next thing?
Couple of things. I've actually got a contemporary young adult fantasy on the go. It's kind of a little more sci-fi, maybe, or very soft sci-fi, though. And also, like I said, I'm kind of working on these 3 novels that will take these characters into 1284, maybe 1287 even, because there's some things that happened that I need to find out about, and I need to kind of put the country back to some kind of whole, because obviously they survived, you know what I mean? And I want to tell that story too. So I've got those on the go right now. Always got short stories that I can never seem to get time to finish, because short stories are little gems, and they have to be polished, right?
And there's no imminent release right now?
Not yet. Not just yet. It takes me a while. So but I'm hoping in 2022 I have something ready, at least ready to send out. If not, I don't self-publish, so that's a problem right now, because what I'm hearing is, if you're sending something out now, you're looking at 2023 before anything will come out, maybe even 2024, because they're kind of backlogged with all the things they didn't do in 2020. There's, So I don't know. I've been thinking more about should I or shouldn't I self-publish, especially these 3 novels that are related to my series here with Wood Dragon Books. I think I could probably get those out a little quicker.
No, for sure, yeah.
I'd like to anyway.
So I know you touched on it, but where can people find your books, if they're looking for them?
I think the best place I could send people is my website, which is mariepowell.ca. So it's Marie Powell from Canada, right? And you'll find my social media there. I have a newsletter too. Please join my newsletter. I would love to have more people in my newsletter, and I will send all kinds of information out with that way as well. And it's everywhere. It's on Amazon. It's in all the bookstores and all the online stores and things like that. So
right.
Just look Last of the Gifted and then put my name in there. You'll find it.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you for being with us today. We appreciate you coming on and speaking with us and tell us a little bit about your Marie Powell's fantasy world and your journeys into the British Isles. I'm looking forward to going myself whenever we can get past this crazy times that we're in. But so just before we leave, Dave, is there anything new in the David M. Kelly universe?
I changed a word in my novel today.
Good for you. So I guess you didn't participate in Nano then.
No, I didn't. I never have. I don't know. It's not one of the things that kind of really appeals to me. I tend to try and work in my own time, and I'm happy to do that. You know, and sometimes it takes longer than others.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, I'm editing my second Logan Two Feathers book, and that should be out early next year. And that's kind of like where I am at the moment. It's
awesome.
Just one of these long, kind of like dragging out processes right now.
Yeah, and I imagine things are getting a little bit slower there in Sudbury as things start to freeze over. So
my brain seems to be, yes.
But yeah, no, for sure, as the winter sets in. Anyway, so I've got really nothing much going on with my universe. I'm about 42,000 words into book 3 in the Highcliffe Guardian series, and it's been really slow lately. We just had a fence blow down the other day, so I've been doing other things, and I feel thankful I can work from home, so I can actually not write and go and deal with that things as opposed to working in the real world. So anyway, so going forward, we're going to be going through a 3-week break from Looking for Legends. So Marie, you're our last guest this year, and this is the first year that we've had Looking for Legends. So we appreciate you being on here and being our last guest of the year. We will return on January 11th when we speak with author Connie Hoff. So until we meet again, Dave and I wish everyone a safe and happy holiday season, and we hope the new year turns into the best one yet. You know, let's get through this crazy time, and hopefully we can move forward next year. So until we meet again, take good care, everybody.